So we're going to tie the grey Wulff from the Bann Wulff pack. So the Wulff pack allows us to tie essentially a green Wulff and a grey Wulff, although using other materials we can tie a variety of different ones. So I'm going to use the materials that allow us to tie the grey Wulff here. So we have our standard size 10 hook, and I'm going to put on my tying thread. So don't be too particular on what thread you have to use. I'm using a white gel spun here, but you can use a black tying thread, use whatever suits. And we're going to use the hook, the grey, natural grey squirrel tail, the grizzle hackles, and we're also going to use the grey floating yarn that's in the packet. We'll take that out. Okay, so a Wulff is a style of a fly, and originally they were quite long fibred, uneven almost. I suppose it depends on your style, but some people like them to be quite stumpy and squat, and they like the ends of the fibers to be very straight. So that's up to yourself. So if you want a more natural look to it, just take the fibers straight off the tail, and if you want it to be, as I said, more regimented, then stack them. So I'll show you how to stack here. So what you would do is take your hair stacker, set it in, and then you tamp it down by tapping it, and then when you take the stacker apart, you'll find that the tips of the fibers have aligned. You grab them by the tips, you just get rid of any of the short stuff that happens to be left behind it, and that is what we tie in as our tail. So as these things are tending to imitate mayflies, or that's why we're tying them, mayflies have quite long tails, so it is up to yourself, but you could easily go the length of the shank again past it, but a lot of Wulffs probably are shorter than that. So I'm going to lay that on, have roughly one shank length sitting out the back. So as you can see, I'm holding the tail fibers into a bunch. I'm kind of holding them up on top. So then as I tighten this all down, it should be kept on top. So when you pull it tight, it will flare. And if you want it to then be a little bit more tidied in than that, then what you need to do is just take maybe the last lap or so just to be not so tight over it. See, I'm going backwards onto it here, but not pulling tight into it, because tight will flare it. And then I'm going to trim off the waist ends here. So what you can do is to add a little bit of varnish into this. So I would just varnish the underside of the shank and a little bit of that. It'll help the whole thing stop spinning. So we'll wrap into that. Get rid of the excess. So the squirrel also provides the material for the wings of this fly. So what we'll do is the same again, but this time slightly bigger bunch, because what we're going to do is split the wings. Although again, that's up to yourself. Some people would actually just tie one wing in, pointing forwards. So we'll get rid of the short stuff out of that. Again, I'm going to put it through the hair stacker here. As I said, if you don't have a hair stacker, don't worry, just take it off the bunch and do it that way, or off the tail direct, sorry. So for this, what we do is we take that bunch and we point it forwards. Choose what length you want your wings to be. Again, that'll be a personal preference. I've seen some Wulffs that are very short, and then we're tying that in. So I'm trying not to let that spin around the shank too much if I can help it. So I'm sort of holding it up on top, and then I'm wrapping backwards. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this off at a bit of an angle. So as you can see, I'm holding it up slightly, and then I'm going to go in with my scissors, so they're then pointing parallel to the shank of the hook. Because this is an angle, and if I cut like this, it's going to cut a taper into the bunch. Okay, so some of the fibers are much shorter, some of them are a bit longer. I'm going to just put a little bit of varnish into that, and then start to wrap backwards over that. As you can see, it has tightened the whole thing into a neat tapered body, stroke underbody, whatever you want to call it, because we're going to lay our grey floss onto that. So we just take off the excess. So as you can see, wings pointing straight forward. So how you want your wing shape to be, again, is a personal preference, but most people would probably split this. So what we're going to do here is I'm just going to turn it towards myself, so you should be able to see it essentially from the underside, and I'm dividing it into two roughly equal sides, and then I'll hold one and I'll take my thread through the gap between them and then through the other way, and I now have two splayed forward wings with a very flat. Again, some people will fish it like that. So what you then do is take several sort of these sort of figure of eight type loops between that to separate it, and then how tight do you want the wings. So I would tend to leave them quite flared and messy, but some people would actually then wrap around the bunch itself at the base like this, and that allows you to get a very tight wing. You see it compared to the other one, it's tightened in. So then if you are going with that, then you go to the other one and go across it and around and around. So you're going slightly up the bunch. It does tend to want to slip off a little bit, so be prepared for that. So don't try and go too far up it. So we now have these little bases around it. So by a squeeze I can set it upright, pull it that it's sideways, okay, or have them pointing forward. So again, that's totally up to yourself. But once you get it into the position that you want it to be, what I would do is I'd add something that just fixes it in that position. So a bit of varnish or super glue or something like that there, just to set them where you want them to be. So we'll take our tie-in thread down to the back again here, and then we're going to take this grey yarn. I think this is actually a floating yarn. Yeah, it's a floating yarn, so that will help with the buoyancy of the fly, as this is a fully dry fly. I'm going to cut a bit of that off. So what I would probably do with that is to split that. So I'm going to split it into two strands. Yeah, it unravels. So that'll give me a more controlled, thinner body, I think. So I'm going to tie that in. You notice I'm tying it in sort of the length of the body, and the reason for that is I'm trying not to introduce lumps into what is my underbody, because that will show through because I'm wrapping a floss. So I tend to wrap things by turning the hook upside down, because I find it easier to get in like that under the hook point, whereas if you go like this, you tend to catch your hook on the way around. So This way, wrapping into the curvature of the hook, I find is more controlled. Wrap board here, and then we'll tie it in just behind those wings. I'm going to flip it back on itself and tie over it just for added security there. Trim that off. So that is our wing structure, tail and body set. So now we need to wrap a hackle. So looking at our bunch of hackles, there are, what I can see is that there are different sizes. So obviously if you have different sized hooks, you can tie different sized flies. So there's hackles here that'll tie an 8 to 10, a 12, possibly a 14, but certainly that you could get several sizes of fly tied out of the hook or the feathers that we have here. So I'm going to snap that off. I'm going to tie it in by its base. Just stripped a little section of it there. And how do you tie a hackle in? How do you wrap it? Sorry, so you can just tie it at the back and wrap forward and tie it off at the front. Or you can wrap it back on itself and then tie it off at the back and wrap through it, which you might have seen me do. So we shall have a go at a standard wrap here. So I'm tying that in, then I'm going to transfer my fly tying thread to the front of the fly. Put on my hackle pliers. Now the first turn is always the most difficult to get going. I just put a bit too much pressure on my thread there. But once we get it in place, I can then start to wrap. So we've got several turns here behind the wings. Then I'm going to just pull all back and I'm going to get in front of them. And tie that off. The wings can make a little bit awkward just for hand position, but as I said, because I set them with varnish here, I'm not overly worried that with where they are at the minute. I can always change the position until that dries. So we'll do a whip finish, take that off and nick off what's left of our hackle. So that's our fly tied. We just need to varnish the head of it. A little bit of varnish in there, and then with what was left of our hackle, just the tip of it, we can use that just to make sure that our eye is clear. So that is a grey Wulff tied with the grey squirrel and the polypropylene floating yarn that we had, and also the grizzle hackles. So how bushy or otherwise you want your fly is up to yourself. So personally, I'm not that big of a fan of a really heavily dressed one. I think it's more natural to have it like slightly more sparse. So I would probably err on the one hackle, whereas if you wanted a real bushy floating cork of a thing, then you could probably put in 2 hackles there and tie it like that there. So that is our Bann Valley grey Wulff tied. So hopefully you enjoyed the video and got some tips from it. What we'll do is we will use the green and yellow materials that we got as well in the pack to do the green version of the fly. So check out the other videos. There's also the unboxing one of this, and what we'll also have a think about is the materials that we're building up from our previous packs and transferring some of them across into, because as we said, the Wulff here is a style of a fly rather than actual pattern. So the fact that we have this material, you know, for the wings, the natural squirrel, we also have in the pack as well this yellow version, so we can combine them, we can chop and change, I suppose, if you want. We can use hackles that we got in other packs, we can use dubbings that we got in other packs as well, and we can sort of add them together to come up with different variations on the theme which suit different conditions on the day.